senators in the 1980 election. For 6 years, President Reagan has worked at developing an active anti-communist foreign policy. Despite a large military buildup, the liberation of Grenada, and limited success in Central America, the Reagan administration has failed to create a new consensus and new understanding in American politics, the Congress, and the bureaucracy. Indeed, Harry Truman accomplished vastly more in foreign policy in 5 years than President Reagan has in the same length of time. There are essentially 7 reasons the Reagan administration has failed to achieve its foreign policy goals. First, it has not focused on vision, on clarity of language, and on defining and describing reality. The change from the passive McGovernite approach from 1970 to 1979 to an active pro-freedom strategy requires a vision-level debate. Second, the Reagan administration has not developed a systematic debate ensuring continuity of public awareness and learning. If the Soviet Empire's transnational challenge is as great as President Reagan's occasional speeches imply, then educating the American people and creating a new consensus is a full-time job. The very absence of focus and continuity reassures many Americans that the debate doesn't require their attention. Third, a vision-level shift from McGovernite passivism to Reaganite activism must occur first by educating and convincing the nation's news media and educated leadership at the grassroots. Second, by having them help educate the country at large. And third, by changing the Congress. If you'll notice, from 1945 to 1950, President Truman did not start by compromising with the isolationist left or compromising with the isolationist right. President Truman started by going to the country and having the country re-elect those who favored stopping communism and defeat those who favored isolationism. The Reagan administration has followed precisely the opposite formula for 5 years in its efforts to appease the center-left senators and congressmen, all of whom are under pressure from the militant McGovernite left. Remember, there are many people who mean well, who understand reality, who would like to work with the president. But if you serve in a House Democratic caucus in which the majority represents the McGovern left, it is impossible to consistently be with the president without losing opportunities for committee assignments, without being under pressure. This has blurred the debate. Trying to win tactically in a House dominated by left-wing ideologues is a formula for frustration. Fourth, the Reagan administration has failed, and still fails, to recognize how many changes are necessary in the executive branch's ability to develop and implement a pro-freedom transnational strategy powerful enough to meet the Soviet Empire's threat. The current diplomatic, intelligence, and military systems are simply incapable of achieving President Reagan's goals or implementing his vision. 16 years of left-wing McGovernite assault on American government has led to a bureaucratic timidity and defeatism which is systematically misunderstood and underestimated by the Reagan White House. While the President wants to defeat communism in Central America, 80% of his State Department wants to cut a deal and find an accommodation with the Nicaraguan Communist government. While Reagan wants a military capable of arming and training freedom fighters, the Defense Department has learned the lessons of Vietnam and wants to avoid transnational conflicts. While Reagan believes in free enterprise, the Agency for International Development continues to export bureaucratic red tape and government-dominated liberal welfare state economics. Again and again, the gap between the Reagan rhetoric and the Reagan administration reality is massive and self-destructive. The Reagan team can only achieve their goals when they realize that they face a Truman-scale job of inventing effective systems, not the Eisenhower-scale job of fine-tuning an already successful system. Fifth, the Reagan administration can begin to succeed only by requiring and managing dramatic change in the bureaucracy. Getting effective modern anti-helicopter weapons now, developing an effective Latin American public education program about the Soviet Empire now, launching a United Nations fight against Soviet and Cuban colonialism now, and setting up Radio Marti-type branches in Africa and Honduras now is the style and speed necessary. Action this day was Churchill's theme for World War II. If Reagan is to leave behind a revitalized, actively anti-communist bureaucracy, he must impose his will now. Sixth, the Reagan administration must accept the fact that its vision of a Soviet empire, communist Cuban colonial troops, and transnational threat to freedom in general and America in particular is simply unacceptable to the McGovernite left. We are engaged in a struggle between two visions of America and two visions of the world. These visions are incompatible and beyond compromise. The McGovernite left rejects Reagan's version of reality and therefore are appalled by his proposed response to that reality. A debate between two visions or two worldviews is dramatically different from a debate over strategy, operations, and tactics. The gap between Reagan and the McGovernite left is the same as that between Truman and the Henry Wallace progressives. Between such differences, there can be no compromise. One side will win, the other side will lose. The Reagan administration should actively court those Democrats who have committed heresy against their party and encouraged active anti-communist transnational policies. The 13 Democrats who spoke in the House in favor of helping freedom in Central America are the leadership basis for a future bipartisan consensus on active anti-communism. The 46 Democrats who voted yes on aid to the freedom fighters represent nearly 1/5 of the House Democrats, and if banded together, can survive as a pro-freedom activist anti-communist faction. The Reagan administration goal must be to define, clarify, and isolate the McGovernite left. The soft nose must be encouraged to join the active anti-communist because they can't afford to be McGovernites. The strategy must be to divide by defining and polarizing and to build a stable, self-identified, bipartisan, and active anti-communist majority. 7. President Reagan wants to lead enormous shifts in public opinion, elected officials' behavior, and bureaucratic effectiveness. Yet he keeps trying to achieve these things, these changes incrementally, and by courting the very groups who have developed the McGovernite policies he opposes. The fact is, McGovernite House members sought positions on the Foreign Affairs Committee, on Armed Services, and on the key appropriations committees precisely to fight for their isolationist ideological worldview. They believe in their worldview, and they will do everything possible to fight for their beliefs. That is their right in a free society, and we should honor them for the courage of their commitment. By nature, the wheelers and dealers and the political technicians who surround any White House keep trying to design conflict avoidance strategies in foreign policy. They fail to understand the dynamics of change in American politics and government. They seek change through compromise, when in fact in a free society, one more often gets change through disagreement and conflict. If President Reagan truly wants to use his last 3 years in office to reshape the public, political, and governmental systems of American foreign policy, he is going to have to fight more often and more tenaciously. Theodore Roosevelt, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and Harry Truman would have understood the challenge facing President Reagan. They relished a good, spirited fight because they knew fights attract attention. Attention is the first step to education. Education is the first step to public support. Public support is the key to organized political power, and organized political power is the key to building a sustainable, activist, anti-communist coalition.